Zelensky is fighting for Ukraine's survival, and Europe is his lifeline. While Donald Trump prepares to meet Vladimir Putin in Alaska on August 15th, European leaders are rallying behind Ukraine's president, creating a diplomatic showdown that could determine the future of the war. We're talking about a coordinated effort by Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Finland to ensure Ukraine has a voice in any peace negotiations. It's not just diplomatic support, it's a strategic countermove against what many see as Trump's dangerous tilt toward Putin. So what exactly is Europe doing to back Zelensky, and why is this European support so crucial right now? To understand that, we need to look at how dramatically the diplomatic landscape has shifted since Trump returned to office. European leaders won diplomatic backing from Europe and NATO on Sunday as Zelensky rallied support ahead of a Russia-US summit this week, where Kyiv fears Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump may try to dictate terms for ending the 3.5-year war. The stakes couldn't be higher. Any decisions taken without Ukraine will be stillborn and unworkable, as the Ukrainian president has made absolutely clear. On Saturday, the leaders of Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Finland, and the European Commission made it crystal clear that any diplomatic solution must protect the security interests of Ukraine and Europe. The U.S. has the power to force Russia to negotiate seriously, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said on Sunday. But she added a crucial caveat: any deal between the U.S. and Russia must have Ukraine and the EU included, for it is a matter of Ukraine's and the whole of Europe's security. This isn't just diplomatic rhetoric, it's a direct challenge to Trump's apparent preference for bilateral talks with Putin. The Trump-Putin meeting, scheduled for August 15th in Alaska, represents everything European leaders feared would happen. Trump announced the meeting after his envoy Steve Witkoff met with Putin for 3 hours in Moscow, coming away with what Secretary of State Marco Rubio described as the first concrete proposals from Russia about ending the war. But here's the problem. Trump made no mention of whether Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky would be
So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
Tending. The Russians have made it clear they prefer a bilateral meeting with Trump, deliberately sidelining Ukraine and Europe. Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, pointedly dismissed the idea of a trilateral summit, saying the Russian side left this option completely without comment. What we're seeing is a calculated attempt to negotiate Ukraine's future without Ukraine at the table, a scenario that Ukrainian officials have compared to the Munich Agreement of 1938, when European powers decided Czechoslovakia's fate without its participation. European leaders have been haunted for months by the fear that Trump, keen to claim credit for making peace and hoping to seal lucrative joint business deals between the U.S. and Russia, could align with Putin to cut a deal that would be deeply disadvantageous to Kyiv.
And nothing happened, and Putin notices that. But second, to the other point you made, it is always a gift to any leader in the world to sit down with the President of the United States of America. When I worked for President Obama and planned summits with Russian leaders and other countries, we always knew that this was something we were giving them, and we expected something in return. And what I think is wrong about this sequencing is I worry that Putin will get the gift. He'll get the gift of sitting next to the United States president in the United States of America, by the way, in Alaska, a part of the former Russian Empire, by the way, that some Russian nationalists still think that they need back. They should have got back, that we hoodwinked them. Just an odd choice in my view.
The approach Trump is taking fundamentally undermines his ability to actually mediate this conflict effectively. By discussing territorial swaps without Ukrainian participation, he's essentially gifting Putin a diplomatic victory before negotiations even begin. They had drawn some encouragement lately as Trump began criticizing Putin after Russia pounded Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities with its heaviest air attacks of the war. But the impending Putin-Trump summit has revived fears that Kyiv and Europe could be sidelined. European officials accused Europe of trying to thwart Trump's efforts to end the war. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev posted on social media that the Euro imbeciles are trying to prevent American efforts to help resolve the Ukrainian conflict, but Europe isn't backing down.
Це російська війна, це агресія Росії. Саме Росія повинна піти на припинення вогню та на реальну дипломатію, яка може гарантувати мир. Україну чітко підтримують, і я за це дуже вдячний всім партнерам. Також всіх об'єднує розуміння того, що війна Росії проти України – це війна в Європі і проти Європи. Всі рішення, які будуть ухвалюватись, щоб закінчити цю війну, щоб гарантувати безпеку, дійсно стосуються всієї Європи, а не когось одного. Тому голос Європи має впливати на процеси, і ми домовляємось з нашими європейськими лідерами щодо наших розмов та наших зустрічей, щоб узгодити всі позиції. Також щодо роботи кожного з нас з іншими лідерами, щоб позиції Європи були захищені. Ми плануємо деякі зустрічі на континенті. Третє. Звісно, кожен точно знає, що ключові рішення в Росії ухвалює одна людина. І що ця людина боїться.
European leaders have created what amounts to a diplomatic firewall around Ukraine. The war against Ukraine is fundamentally a war against all of Europe, and Europe's voice must be part of any peace process. The key decisions about ending this conflict cannot be made by one person in Moscow who fears American sanctions. They must involve all stakeholders who are affected by this aggression. After Trump's explosive confrontation with Zelensky at the White House in February, where Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance berated the Ukrainian president, European leaders immediately rallied to Zelensky's defense. French President Emmanuel Macron was among the most pointed, distinguishing between what he called the aggressor, Russia, and the victim, Ukraine. He said that countries including France that had helped Ukraine and sanctioned Russia were right to continue doing so. Tish Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office issued a statement saying he retains unwavering support for Ukraine and is doing all he can to find a path forward to a lasting peace based on sovereignty and security for Ukraine. The European Union has gone even further, reaffirming support for Zelensky as the legitimate president of Ukraine, after Trump called him a dictator and criticized the fact that elections didn't take place last year when his mandate expired. We have a very direct and clear position on this matter. President Zelensky was legitimately elected in free, fair, and democratic elections, European Commission Deputy Spokesperson Stefan de Kiersmaker told reporters. The EU also made it clear that ending the war without involving Ukraine and Europe in negotiations is not possible. Europe is backing up its diplomatic support with concrete action. Following an emergency summit on March 6th, the EU agreed to mobilize up to 800 billion euros for defense spending amid fears that the US might scale down US's presence on the continent. The Rearm Europe initiative includes a 150 billion euro loan covered by unused budget funds and steps to loosen fiscal rules and free up 600 billion euros in government spending. European nations announced fresh tranches of assistance for Ukraine ahead of Zelensky's visits to Brussels. The Netherlands provided $3.8 billion in funding for 2026, with $700 million earmarked for drone development. Norway ensured a significant increase in aid for Ukraine, while Poland announced another $215 million in aid. France began sharing intelligence resources with Ukraine following the U.S. freeze. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte told ABC News that any summit will be about testing Putin, how serious he is on bringing this terrible war to an end. He added that it will be about security guarantees and the absolute need to acknowledge that Ukraine decides on its own future, that Ukraine has to be a sovereign nation. This represents a fundamental disagreement with Trump's approach. While Trump appears willing to let Putin and Russia dictate terms, NATO and European leaders insist Ukraine must have agency in determining its own future. The strategic implications of this European support are massive. Europe is essentially creating an alternative power center that could sustain Ukraine even if Trump abandons it. European countries have already supplied more overall aid to Ukraine since 2022 than the United States, according to the Kiel Institute. While European weapon stocks don't match the scale of the Pentagon's and supplies are running low after years of dispatching equipment to Ukraine, European leaders are mobilizing resources on an unprecedented scale. As former UK Joint Forces Command head Genera L. Richard Barons put it, it's about will, and European leaders are demonstrating that will. But this European support comes with its own challenges. Trump has made it clear he views European efforts as obstructive to his peace plans. He posted on Truth Social that Europe, in the meeting they had with Zelensky, stated flatly that they cannot do the job without the United States. Trump officials have accused Zelensky of sabotaging peace talks and suggested he may need to relinquish power. Secretary of State Marco Rubio accused Zelensky of foiling Trump's plans to strike a ceasefire with Russia, claiming Zelensky disrupted American efforts to get Putin to the negotiating table. The fundamental disagreement between Europe and Trump centers on what peace should look like.
Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine is ready for real solutions that can bring peace. Solutions that are against us, solutions that are without Ukraine, are simultaneously solutions against peace. They will not achieve anything. These are dead solutions.
And it's worth repeating, this summit between Trump and Putin does not include any representation of Ukraine, the country which was invaded, first when Russia illegally annexed Crimea in 2014, and then again the full-scale invasion 8 years later. Emmanuel Shaz has more in Kyiv.
Trump has suggested any peace deal would involve some swapping of territories, a controversial prospect that would essentially reward Russia's aggression. The Ukrainian president has made his position crystal clear. Ukrainians will not surrender their land to the occupier, and any solutions made without Ukraine's participation are dead solutions that will never work. European leaders have rejected this approach. We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force, European leaders said in a joint statement backed by Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Finland. The current line of contact should be the starting point of negotiations. This represents a direct contradiction to Trump's apparent willingness to let Russia keep seized territory. Zelensky himself has firmly rejected any territorial concessions. In a video address after Trump's announcement of the Putin meeting, he said Ukraine is also ready to work together with President Trump, but vowed his people will not give their land to the occupier. He warned that any decisions that are against us, any decisions that are without Ukraine, are also decisions against peace. This puts him directly at odds with what Trump appears to be considering. The timing of all this couldn't be more critical. Russia took only about 500 square kilometers of territory in July, according to Western military analysts, but its grinding advances have come at the cost of very high casualties. Russia has recently pounded Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities with its heaviest air attacks of the war. Ukraine has also launched surprise drone strikes deep into Russia. The military situation is essentially stalemated, which should give Ukraine leverage in negotiations, but only if it has strong backing.
Brings back memories about Munich 1938, because we have very similar situation. First of all, the fate of the country, which is a victim of aggression, is being decided by two great powers without participation of this country. So it's a very dangerous situation for Ukraine. And Ukraine should also participate, the president of Ukraine should also participate in these negotiations. And the second big issue, which is reminiscent of Munich 1938, is related to the fact that the aggressor can be rewarded, not punished, for the crime of aggression and for occupation of the territories. It's extremely dangerous situation, not only for Ukraine, but also for international law and for the whole world.
European leaders understand that their support for Zelensky is about more than just Ukraine. It's about the fundamental principle that international borders cannot be changed by force. It's about preventing Putin from achieving through diplomacy what he couldn't achieve through military conquest. And it's about ensuring that Europe has a voice in determining the security architecture of the continent. French President Macron put it bluntly, Ukraine must always be included and its rights respected in any peace negotiations. The Alaska summit on August 15th will be a crucial test of these competing visions. Putin will come to the table seeking to legitimize his territorial gains and split the Western alliance. Trump appears willing to give him much of what he wants in exchange for a quick end to the fighting. But European leaders have made it clear they won't accept a deal that rewards aggression and abandons Ukraine. As EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said, EU foreign ministers will meet to discuss next steps, suggesting Europe is prepared to act independently if necessary. What makes this European support so significant is that it gives Zelensky options. Even if Trump abandons Ukraine or forces it into an unfavorable deal, Europe could potentially provide enough support to keep Ukraine viable as an independent state. The €800 billion defense mobilization, the intelligence sharing, the weapon supplies, and the diplomatic backing all create a foundation that Ukraine could build on even without American support. But there are real limitations to what Europe can do alone. While European aid has been substantial, American military support has been crucial throughout the war. The Pentagon's weapons stocks and intelligence capabilities are simply unmatched. European defense production is ramping up, but it will take time to reach the scale needed to fully replace American support. And politically, sustaining support for Ukraine over the long term will be challenging as European economies struggle with their own problems. The broader implications of this diplomatic split extend far beyond Ukraine. We're witnessing a fundamental realignment of the Western alliance. For the first time since World War II, European leaders are preparing to act independently of the United States on a major security issue. This could mark the beginning of a more independent European foreign policy, with the EU developing its own military capabilities and diplomatic initiatives separate from NATO and American leadership. Russian officials are certainly trying to exploit these divisions. They've accused Europe of trying to thwart Trump's peace efforts and have suggested that European support for Ukraine is actually prolonging the war. But European leaders have made it clear they won't be intimidated. As European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, Europe faces a clear and present danger, and therefore Europe has to be able to protect itself, to defend itself, as we have to put Ukraine in a position to protect itself and to push for a lasting and just peace. The success or failure of European support for Zelensky will likely determine not just Ukraine's fate, but the future of European security and the transatlantic alliance. If Europe can successfully sustain Ukraine without American help, it will mark a new era of European strategic autonomy. If European support proves insufficient, it could embolden Putin and other authoritarian leaders around the world. As we head toward the August 15th summit in Alaska, the stakes couldn't be higher. Trump will meet with Putin, possibly without Zelensky present, to discuss terms for ending the war. European leaders will be watching closely, ready to reject any deal that doesn't protect Ukrainian sovereignty and European security interests. And Zelensky will be relying on European support to maintain his leverage and resist pressure to accept an unfavorable peace. The diplomatic battle lines are clearly drawn. On one side, Trump and Putin appear ready to cut a deal over Ukraine's head. On the other side, European leaders and Zelensky are insisting that any peace must be just and must include Ukraine as a full participant. The outcome of this confrontation will shape the future of European security for decades to come. Thanks for watching. If you want to stay updated on how this diplomatic crisis unfolds and what it means for the future of the war in Ukraine, be sure to subscribe for more in-depth analyses of these crucial developments.